welcome everyone. We're so excited for another On Art Conversations with the Artists. And today I'm joined by Curator Chase Dougherty and artist Michal Gavish, who has an installation on view at the Delaware Contemporary right now.
So thank you for everyone for being here. And I am very excited to introduce Michal Gavish as one of our exhibiting artists currently in the Hennessy Project space. She has an installation up right now, and Michal is going to lead us through a little bit of a presentation to introduce us to her body of work and how this aligns kind of with her background, and just give us a nice, really introduction to the space. And then we will follow up with some questions and answers. So take it away, Michal. Really excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Thank you, Chase, and thank you, Brittany. And I wanted to give you some background for my new exhibition, The Ballad of Spread, at the Delaware Contemporary. And this exhibition is on the borderline between art and science. It relates to my past as a research scientist, which is still the center of my artwork. As a scientist, I developed an introverted practice, which is actually a quiet look at ideas and working on experiments. In fact, it is so introverted that it forces you to look inward literally. As a result, as an artist, the inner body world became my resource, and I delved more and more into this visual content. I realized that much of my visual world as a scientist used to be molecules and small structures that are actually unseen to the eye. Yet, these minute elements are the building blocks of our world and have so many implications on life, on health, on social structure, and the world environment, so that they end up binding together the biological with the cultural and the personal. And so for many years, I started to realize that as a scientist, many of my thoughts, my ideas, and my anxieties concentrated on these small scales. And now adapting the molecular structures as my research material is what I wanted to do. But this was a very different process than the usual material that scientists are painting from, such as portraiture or plein air, because they work on direct visual materials. So for the visual world, this visual is actually natural. And as I try to visual the invisible here, I'm very interested in this step of visual perception that takes the imagery that is not direct, but is based on experiments and man-made models, woman-made models. I continue in my art using this special visual language that scientists, chemists, biologists are all using in their research. They build models of this unseen world, and in a way, I was always fascinated by the fact that science uses visual tools to such an extent, which is something that when you don't do science, you don't realize how much visual there is in that field. So, and I have here an example for a model that is made of X-rays, made from X-ray experiments. Let me just do this full screen here. Yeah. So one of my works in the installation in the Delaware exhibition is a global drift, which is based on a DNA and other molecular models that are built from this type of X-ray studies. And I painted such a model of a long DNA molecule the long DNA strands and created from there my own dimensional structure that has actual volume. So it is like making such work is actually like building a 3D map of these molecules that are actually points. We don't really know what each one of them looks like. So we have this kind of trying to build a world from something that we don't really know what it's like visually. And so I created this very specific structure that is also shown now in a different version or a new iteration that I've created for Delaware Contemporary, where I have here this kind of flow of continuation from the incubation to the mutation of this DNA molecule. I created here a very specific structure with its own angles and curvatures, and all this is from paper, so that at the same time, this is also very soft and translucent, somehow pondering on its vulnerability. My next work, Spiral of Intricacy, was based on a collaboration that I had with Professor On Brandman from Stanford University, the biology department. And I began a microscopic to create from his laboratory imagery from protein aggregates. And one thing that really interested me was that the color here of this microscope imagery was not the actual color of the protein. It's not red like this, but this is all scientist made. The scientists arbitrarily decide on these colors. Yet somehow that arbitrary reddish scheme took on its own life and its own set of associations with body liquid and blood. This process reminded me a lot in the art history, like German Expressionism, where the color takes on its own new reality. So even the raw microscope slides already had that dimension of the image, and you can see here the original one, as it's being affected by color that scientists randomly selected for it. So I used here ImageJ, which is a program that allows imagery to be displayed in layers. And I opened these microscope samples that I took from the laboratory, and I magnified them and painted them on translucent layers of fabric. In the installation, these look like abstract painting, actually, or abstract patterns. And this is an older iteration of this work. The large area of colors are somehow transformed in my mind into color fields that were larger than life. So it became a theatrical thing of something bigger than us. Instead of like looking into the microscope inward into these very little things, it became like a big thing that we are inside it. And that was one of the things that I really wanted in these installations. Now, for this installation, I created especially the next work, which is called Exponential Bloom. And this is a diorama of virus species. Here, I was integrating the arbitrary display color of virus images that I researched with the amazing symmetry of these viral bodies. I imagine their circular mandala-shaped bodies float as if they are floating in space. You know, that was kind of my feeling throughout the pandemic, having these kind of viruses floating all around and try to somehow capture this. And they appear beautiful and almost sublime. And at the same time, they are menacing. The translucent magnified biological structures became, for me, like a fleeting contemporary field guide that I really like their aesthetics. At the same time, their images emerge like thin embroidery patterns. Like you can imagine this kind of old tradition of women creating this kind of patterns, and that sometimes appear flat and at other moments three-dimensional. So as I was adapting these circular symmetries, I invented my own intricate combinations and staged and the magnified bodies of these biological components. And this somehow leads you to hopefully meditate on their medical application and social connections. And I incorporated at the same time the contradiction of their exterior beauty, instilling, and in the same time, as they are instilling this undercurrent of turmoil in these quiet shapes that generate in this portrayal. Examining the aesthetics beauty of this storming scenario, I reflect on their implication of viral genetic data, on the delicate balance between the virus and our vitality. So I realized that this paradox of painting, or the actual painting that I'm doing here in 3 dimensions, started from my need to express invisible visibility and became the practice of deconstructing spaces, as if I'm taking the flat image and render it with volume, inventing the 3 dimensions again. With the transparent fabric layers, the structure became tentative, relating to as I said before, the vulnerability of these small biological bodies. And finally, the last work that I just want to talk very shortly about is my video on the year of the virus that I developed around a series of painting and installations that I done in my studio, and also includes photographs that I took throughout the year of the pandemic in Washington, DC. I was following my practice in my research of the submicroscopic struggle between kind of the virus and the body. So I tried to make this kind of drama of the fight between the bodies, the antibodies, and the antigen, the virus and the body, that the biological attackers as they are facing their defenders. Imagining the virus, I have here just a couple of images of this. As I was imagining these, multiplying them and following this kind of exponential bloom. I was using in my video many layers, and this is a still, I have a couple of stills here from my video so that to show what I'm thinking about. So I actually use this video to stream the visuality of my pandemic. The images are based on paintings which I made throughout this year, where I'm pairing both graphs, which you can see some of them here. This is based on a graph of the spread of the pandemic, with photographs that I took from demonstrations in my city, like Black Lives Matter started with Black Life Matters in the spring and continues to the winter with the Capitol insurrections. I have all these videos that are layered with my with this kind of images of the virus and its scientific interpretation. And in this kind of work, in this kind of layering, and this is from the winter insurrection, and this is from the Black Lives Matter. And if you can see here the images of the people, when you see it as moving, it's a little bit clearer than in the still. But what I did here is I actually let the images here walk on the images of the viruses and the antibodies that I painted. And I somehow flipped the dimensions and made these viruses so much larger, and somehow try to play with this proportion between us and these small bodies and the small bodies that are taking over us.
Thank you, Michal. That was wonderful. That was such a great presentation. I'm really happy that you went through that, because I feel like there's so many intricacies to what you're doing. And one of my biggest questions was when you were talking about your two-dimensional work, and I was so happy that you mentioned that you showed those stills in your videos, because those are two-dimensional paintings that you've been doing. And we're not showing any of your two-dimensional work in the project space right now, but I was really wondering, with your two-dimensional work and this installation, where do you feel like the installation, that three-dimensionality, do you feel like it emphasizes these microorganisms better than your two-dimensional? Or how do you kind of see the two-dimensional versus your three-dimensional, and what you can really work with both separately and together? Does that make sense? Am I making?
Yeah, it's actually the most interesting thing to me when I'm thinking about the visual, because the thing is that when you take something that you cannot see, anything that you see is not true. It's actually a model that was constructed artificially. So and then when you paint a two-dimensional picture, you flatten whatever you see, right? When you do a perspective, that's just a trick to give three-dimensional feeling to that space. And I somehow felt that in this case, because it is so unseen and we so much don't know what it really looks like, I want to build my own space. Mm-hmm. So I kind of map it in my two-dimensional work, and then I build it up in the installation, in the video, etc. Mm-hmm.
And I was so happy that you went over the kind of more scientific imagery, like where the inspiration for these forms actually comes from, the actual forms of the microorganisms. So is there any connection to how this scientific machine is capturing layers? You talked about, I can't remember what the machine was called.
It's just any microscope does it today. Okay. And ImageJ is the simple program that gives you these images in
different layers.
Yeah.
So is that a direct connection to the layers that you're creating in these installations, or is it close?
It is close, because what you do in science is, because you cannot photograph something in 3 dimensions. Any photograph will become 2-dimensional. You do it in layers. That's what they do in MRI, for example. Mm-hmm. They take our brain and they put it in slices. And when you add all these slices, you get a 3-dimensional image. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I do it in my practice, Mm-hmm. But mine is not something that's scientifically variable, probably, but that's my space, you see.
Yes, yours become these like beautiful veils of layers that are so, and I encourage everybody, anybody who's listening to this, if you can go to the Delaware Contemporary. I mean, these are really, really wonderful installations, and they really are meant to be seen and experienced in person, because I think that, when we were installing these works and there were so many small adjustments, but those small adjustments really, really made it so that you could see through these layers, these thin veils, and really kind of capture that three-dimensionality, or as close as we can. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so, and the other thing I wanted to bring up is you mentioned theater design and theatrical design, and I thought that that was such another really interesting intersectionality with your work. There's this science piece, there's this visual art piece, but then within the installation, there is this kind of very theatrical feeling. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, actually, theater is something I just love. And I love when it's combined with visual art. And I also love the visual in the theater. I worked for a couple of years when I lived in California in the Pear Theater. And I did their stage design, which was amazing for me. So the thing about it is that it's so, I don't know how to say it nicely, but it's so fake, like, if you look behind, it's all like with these stretchers and of course, but as the audience in the theater, we want to believe it. So we just flow with it. And I think that's kind of such a beautiful marriage between the audience and the visual or the art, and I want to make it, to try to create it also in the still exhibition. That's, it's limited, it's still, but still it should be okay. So I really love theater. I think it's fantastic.
Well, I definitely think that comes across in this space. I mean, this visitor engagement, this interaction, it really supports that and promotes that. So I think it's very successful. But I'm so happy you talked about your theater design, because I think that that's also an incredibly interesting intersectionality of your artwork. So, well, wonderful, Michal. This was really fantastic. Do you have any other comments, any other things that are coming to mind?
No, I'm just like thinking in the last day since we installed how, it was great installing with you. And I really feel like as we install this exhibition, it's like creating it basically. I brought the pieces, but we kind of created it in the space and it took on its own new life.
Yeah, I 100%. I agree. It was such a joy. It was really, really interesting. And thank you for this amazing presentation. That was fantastic. I think it allowed everybody to really better understand, because like I said, there are so many intricacies to this. So that was fantastic. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chase and Michal. And we hope people will come on out to the Delaware Contemporary and get a chance to see your installation, Ballad of Spread. And it is on view now through the beginning of January. You can find more information about programs and events on our website, decontemporary.org. And we hope to see everybody at the museum again soon. Thank you.